Beneath the twin moons of Zira, the human outpost trembled, not from fear but from awe. The sky split open with violet light as the royal vessel of the Kailari descended its hull, shimmering like liquid obsidian. The humans had fought the Kailari. For 3 long cycles, their cities reduced to ash, their fleets shattered like glass. Yet today no weapons were raised. No alarms sounded. The alien queen had sent her only daughter, Princess Lyra, to negotiate peacefully. Lyra stepped onto the scorched landing, pad her silver skin catching the pale glow of the moons. Her eyes glowed faintly, amber like embers in the dark. She moved with grace that defied gravity, her long limbs wrapped in flowing armor that shifted color with her mood. Behind her stood her honor guard, silent towering figures with 4 arms and eyes like polished onyx. They scanned the humans with cold indifference. The human commander stepped forward, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. He introduced his warriors one by one, each a legend in their own right, battle-hardened veterans who had turned the tide in a dozen lost battles. But Lyra barely glanced at them. Her gaze swept past the scarred veterans, the decorated officers, the seasoned tacticians, until it landed on the last figure in line. He stood barely 18. His uniform too large, his hands still soft from youth. His name was Jake Miller, the youngest soldier in the entire human defense force. He had joined only 6 months ago after his home colony fell, his parents gone. His village erased from the stars. He carried no medals, no scars, no reputation, just a quiet determination that burned in his green eyes. Lyra stopped, her breath catching in her throat for the first time in her life. She felt something unfamiliar. A pull deep in her chest. She pointed one slender finger toward Jake and spoke in perfect English, her voice like wind through crystal chimes. The humans froze. The commander blinked twice, certain he had misheard. The alien princess had come to choose a mate as part of the peace treaty that was the ancient Kailari custom. The victor claims a champion from the defeated to bind the 2 peoples together. But they expected her to pick their strongest, their smartest, their most decorated warrior, not a boy barely out of training. Jake looked around confused, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had never been chosen for anything before. Always the last picked, always the one left behind. Now, an alien princess with eyes like fire was staring at him as if he held the stars in his hands. "You cannot be serious," the commander said, his voice tight with disbelief. "He is just a child." Lyra tilted her head, her silver brow furrowing in what might have been amusement or sorrow. "I see what you do not," she said. "He carries no pride, no hunger for glory, only sorrow and strength born from loss. That is the purest kind of courage." The honor guard shifted uneasily but did not speak. Their loyalty absolute, their silence heavier than steel. Jake swallowed hard, his mouth dry as dust. He wanted to run, to hide, to say no, but something in Lyra's gaze held him still. It was not pity. It was recognition, as if she saw the truth of him, the part he kept buried beneath silence and duty. "I accept," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried across the landing pad like thunder. That night the humans held a quiet ceremony, not of celebration but of farewell. They gave Jake a new uniform stitched with threads of starlight alloy, a gift from their last surviving tech forge. They gave him a blade forged from the core of a fallen warship and a locket with a picture of Earth inside. Lyra watched from the shadows, her heart a storm of emotions. She had never known Kailari did not feel love as humans did. They valued logic, honor, duty. But since seeing Jake, something had cracked open inside her, a seed planted in barren soil now reaching for light. As the royal vessel lifted into the violet sky, Jake stood at the observation window, watching his world shrink into a blue dot then vanish. He felt no fear, only a strange calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. Aboard the ship, Lyra approached him in the quiet of the stardust chamber, the walls alive with bioluminescent vines that pulsed gently with the ship's rhythm. She wore no armor now, only a simple robe that shimmered like moonlight on water. "Why me?" he asked, his voice steady now. "Because you do not seek to own the stars," she replied. "You only wish to protect those beneath them. That is rare even among my people." She reached out her hand, hovering just above his cheek, not quite touching. Kailari did not touch without permission. It was considered sacred, May. She asked. He nodded. Her fingers brushed his skin, and a jolt passed between them. Not electric, but deeper, like two souls recognizing each other across lifetimes. In the weeks that followed, Jake learned the ways of the Kalari. He studied their language, their history, their strange customs. He ate their food, which tasted like memories. He slept beneath ceilings that sang lullabies in forgotten tongues. And through it all, Lyra was there, not as a princess, but as a guide, a friend, and something more neither dared name. The Kalari court watched. With suspicion, whispers spread like wildfire through the crystalline halls. How could their princess choose a human child over their own warriors? Some called for his exile, others for his execution. But Lyra silenced them all with a single decree. Is mine, and by our oldest law none may challenge that. Still danger lingered one night. Jake awoke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor. He slipped from his chamber just in time to see an assassin clad in shadow lunging toward Lyra's quarters. He moved without thinking. Throwing himself between blade and princess, the dagger pierced his shoulder, but he held firm, gripping the assassin's wrist with surprising strength. Lyra emerged, her eyes blazing amber fire. She did not call the guard. She did not speak a word. She simply raised her hand, and the assassin crumbled to dust as if time itself had unraveled him. She turned to Jake, her expression softening as she saw the blood on his tunic. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, he said, through gritted teeth, because you are worth protecting. In that moment, something shifted between them. The last wall fell. The peace treaty was signed. The war ended, not with more blood, but with a union. The human boy and the alien princess stood before, both peoples on the neutral moon of Alaris. Their hands clasped not as victor and vanquished, but as equals. Years later, stories would be told across the galaxy of how the youngest human warrior became the heart of an empire, not through strength of arm, but through the quiet courage of his soul, and how an alien princess who once knew only duty learned to love not in spite of difference, but because of it. Jake never became a king in the human sense. He wore no crown. He gave no orders, but his presence alone changed the Kailari. Their rigid society softened, their wars ceased, their art flourished, and children were taught to value kindness as much as honor. Lyra often watched him from her balcony as he walked among her people, teaching them earth songs, showing them how to plant gardens in the sterile halls of the palace, laughing with young ones who called him Uncle Jake. She would smile. Then a true smile, not the practiced one of royalty, but one born of joy, and she would whisper to the stars that had once felt so cold, now warm with promise. He was hers and she was his, and in that simple truth, the universe found a new kind of peace. The peace between humans and Kalari held, but peace is never quiet. It hums with tension like a wire pulled too tight in the royal spire of Zira. Jake Miller walked the glass corridors, not as a prisoner nor as a guest, but as something new, a human, bound to the air of an ancient star empire. He wore simple clothes now, no uniform, no blade, only a small pendant. Lyra had given him, carved from moonstone that warmed when she was near. He had lived among the Kailari for nearly a year, and still their world felt strange. The air smelled of ozone and blooming crystal flowers. The gravity shifted slightly with the tides of the twin moons, and time itself seemed to move differently, slower in the gardens, faster in the war chambers. Yet Jake had learned to listen not with his ears but with his heart. Lyra ruled with calm precision, but her eyes always found him in a crowd. Her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of court politics. She never demanded his obedience nor his silence. She asked questions about Earth, about human songs, about why people cried when they were happy. Jake answered as best he could, his words clumsy but honest, and she treasured them like rare gems. But not all Kalari accepted. The Union Elder Voss, the head of the High Council, watched Jake with cold eyes narrowed like slits in stone. He believed the princess had been bewitched, that a soft human boy could never understand the weight of Kalari destiny. One evening during the Feast of Twin Echoes, Voss stood before the court, his voice sharp as shattered glass. Princess Lyra, you honor this human with your presence, but he brings nothing to our lineage. No strength, no bloodline, no history. He is a shadow among stars. A murmur rippled through the hall. Lyra sat tall, her silver skin glowing faintly with restrained emotion. Jake remained silent as custom demanded, but his fists clenched beneath the table before Lyra could speak. Jake rose slowly. The room fell still. He did not shout. He did not glare. He simply walked to the center of the chamber and faced Voss. You are right. I have no ancient name, no warship named after my family. I watched my home burn and did nothing because I was too young, too weak. But I chose to stand when I could. I chose to protect when it mattered. That is all any of us can do. Voss sneered. You speak like a poet, not a warrior, and you speak like a ghost clinging to a past that killed millions. Jake replied, his voice low but clear. The war ended because someone dared to choose differently. Not because of more blood, but because of one act of trust. Lyra's eyes shone with pride, but she said nothing. The law required silence in such challenges. Voss stepped forward, his forearms flexing. I challenge the human to the trial of resonance. If he survives, he may stay. If not, his name will be erased from our records forever. The trial of resonance was an ancient rite. A test of mind and spirit, not body. The challenger entered a chamber where memories of the dead echoed endlessly. Most who entered lost themselves within hours, driven mad by the voices of fallen warriors. Jake knew this. He had read the archives. He also knew refusal meant exile and shame for Lyra. Except, he said, the chamber was a sphere of black crystal floating. In the heart of the spire, inside, the air hummed with sorrow. Every step Jake took triggered a memory. A Kalari soldier screaming as his ship broke apart. A mother weeping over a child lost to radiation. A general ordering the destruction of a human nursery colony. The voices clawed at his mind. You do not belong here. You are weak. You are nothing. Jake fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, but he did not close his eyes. He let the pain in. He listened, not to judge but to understand. These were not monsters. They were people twisted by fear and pride, just like humans. She thought of his village, the smell of rain on dry soil, his mother's laugh, his father's rough hands teaching him to plant seeds, not fire guns. And he whispered, not in defiance but in grief, I am sorry. The voices paused. Then one spoke softer than the rest. Why do you mourn us? Because you did not have to die. He said, the war was built on lies, on pride, on the belief that one species must rule the other. But we are all just trying to survive. Silence. Then warmth. The black walls softened into silver light. The chamber opened, not because he won, but because he grieved with them. When Jake stepped out, Voss stood waiting, his face unreadable, but his posture less rigid. You faced our dead not as an enemy, but as a witness. That is not weakness, that is rare courage. He bowed slightly, a gesture no human had ever received from a Kalari elder. From that day, suspicion turned to curiosity. Young Kalari began visiting Jake, asking about Earth Games human food. Why humans hugged when they met. He taught them to draw with charcoal, to tell stories with their hands. Not just their minds. Lyra watched it all with quiet joy, but she knew peace was fragile. News came from the Outer Rim. A splinter faction calling themselves the Pure Blood had risen. They rejected the treaty. They called Lyra a traitor and Jake a parasite. They gathered warships once thought destroyed, hidden in asteroid graves. They would strike soon. Lyra called a war council, but this time she did not sit alone at the head. She placed a chair beside her and gestured for Jake to sit. The elders stiffened, but none objected. We cannot meet fire with fire, Jake said when asked for his thoughts. They believe we are weak because we chose peace, but peace is not weakness, it is choice, and choice is stronger than fear. What do you propose? Lyra asked. Let me speak to them. He said, not as a soldier, but as a human who lost everything. If they hear only commands, they will fight. If they hear a story, they might listen. It was madness, but Lyra trusted him. They sent a single, unarmed shuttle to the edge of the void belt where the pure blood fleet gathered. Jake stood alone on the broadcast deck. No weapons. No armor, just his voice and the truth. My name is Jake Miller. I am human. I watched my world burn. I held my mother's hand as she died. I buried my dog with my bare hands. I joined the war not for glory, but because I had nothing left. He paused, the stars behind him cold and endless. But then I met someone who saw me not as a weapon but as a person, and she taught me that even in the darkest sky, a single light can change everything. You think peace is surrender. It is not. It is the hardest fight of all because it asks you to lay down your hate and pick up hope instead. For a long moment there was only static. Then a voice crackled through the comms, old and weary. "This is General Torrin of the 7th Fleet. I lost 3 sons in the last cycle. I believed humans were beasts, but your words, they sound like my youngest son's before he died." Torrin ordered his fleet to stand down. The rebellion crumbled, not by force, but by memory, by shared grief. Back on Zira, celebrations were quiet. Not with fireworks, but with shared meals, humans and Kalari sitting together, eating strange foods, laughing at clumsy translations. Children playing games that mixed both cultures. Jake walked with Lyra through the Garden of Echoes where light bent into shapes. "Of past and future, do you ever miss Earth?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "But home is not just a place, it is the people who see you and choose you anyway." She took his hand then, not as a princess, but as Lyra, just Lyra. And he held it not as a warrior, but as Jake, just Jake, far above the spire. The twin moons aligned, casting a silver bridge across the sky, a sign the elders said of new beginnings, in the heart of the galaxy. 2 peoples once enemies now wove a new story, not of conquest, but of connection, not of fear, but of fragile, beautiful trust. And it all began with a boy no one noticed and a princess who saw the universe in his eyes. Seasons turned on Zira not with falling leaves, but with shifting light. The twin moons cycled through their silver and violet phases, and with each turn the bond between human and Kalari deepened. Jake no longer felt like an outsider. He walked the crystal halls with ease, spoke the liquid syllables of the Kalari tongue with growing confidence, and his laughter now rang familiar in the gardens where bioluminescent flowers bloomed at the sound of joy. Lyra had grown too, not in power, but in softness. She still ruled with wisdom, but her decrees now carried notes of mercy. She had once judged by law alone. Now she asked what would heal, not just what would punish. And the people noticed. They whispered that the human had changed their princess. But the truth was they had changed each other. Yet peace always carries shadows, and far beyond the borders of the alliance, a new threat stirred not from war, but from silence. The outer colonies of the old human federation had gone dark. No signals, no distress calls, just empty space where thriving worlds once hummed with life scouts sent to investigate, vanished without a trace. The High Council debated for days. Some said it was a natural phenomenon, a rift in space. Others blamed rogue AI left over from the war, but Jake felt it in his bones. Something was wrong. Not loud, not violent, but hungry. He brought his fears to Lyra. Not in the throne room, but in their private chamber where starlight filtered through living glass walls. She listened without interrupting, her amber eyes reflecting the slow pulse of distant sun. "You believe it is alive?" she said. Not a question. "I do," he replied. "It is not attacking. It is consuming quietly like a sickness." Lyra called for a joint expedition. 1 ship, 1 crew, half human, half Kalari. A true union of the treaty. Jake would lead the human side not as a soldier, but as an observer. His gift was not in fighting, but in seeing what others missed. The ship chosen was the Dawn Whisper, small, fast, built from both human steel and Kalari biocrystal. Its heart a fusion core that sang in 2 languages. The crew included Captain Elena Ross, a veteran pilot with steady hands and sharp eyes, and Kalari navigator Orin, whose mind could read star currents like poetry. They launched at the turning of the moons. For weeks they traveled through dead zones where stars seemed dimmer, as if something had sucked the light from them. Then they found the first colony, New Haven, orbiting a quiet red dwarf. The surface was intact. No craters, no fire, but no life either. The cities stood empty, streets clean, as if everyone had simply walked away at once. Jake stepped onto the soil, his boots silent on the pavement. He touched a door handle still warm, a cup of tea on a table still steaming. "They were here minutes ago," he whispered, and scanned the air with his sensory tendrils, his voice tight. "This place is not empty. It is hollowed." Then the silence broke. Not with sound, but with absence. The ship's comms died, the lights flickered, and a cold deeper than space seeped into their bones. From the shadows between buildings, shapes emerged. Not solid, not ghostly, but wrong. They had no faces, no limbs, just shifting voids that pulled at the light around them. "Run," Elena shouted. But Jake stood still. He saw it then, not with his eyes, but with his grief. These were not monsters. They were echoes of loss given form, drawn to places of deep sorrow like moths to a dying flame. They feed on memory, he said aloud. They are not killing, they are collecting paint. Void shapes drifted closer, not attacking but reaching as if asking for the hurt inside them. Orin raised his energy blade, but Jake stopped him. No, they are not our enemy. They are a symptom. He stepped forward, alone, his hands open, empty. I know what it is to lose everything, he said, his voice breaking. But I choose to remember the love, not just the loss. He thought of his mother's lullaby, his father's calloused hand teaching him to plant corn, the smell of rain on dry earth, and he let the memory shine not as a wound but as a light. The void shapes paused, then one drifted near. It did not touch him, but hovered as if listening. Slowly, it began to change. The darkness, softened edges formed. Not human, not Kalari, but something new, a shape of peace. The others followed one by one, dissolving not into nothing but into gentle light that rose into the sky like fireflies. The colony remained empty, but the air felt clean. The silence no longer heavy back. On the dawn whisper, the crew sat in stunned quiet. What were they? Elena asked. Jake looked out at the stars. I think they were. What happens when grief has no place to go? No one to share it with, they became lost souls. Made of sorrow, Orin nodded slowly. In my people's oldest texts there are stories of the weeping dark beings born from wars so terrible. Even the stars cried. Perhaps we created them. The truth settled over them, heavy, but clear. The threat was not an enemy to destroy, but a wound to health. They returned to Zira, not with weapons, but with a warning and a plea. Lyra listened, then acted. She called for a new kind of mission. Not soldiers, but healers, storytellers, musicians, artists from both species. They would travel to the silent worlds, not to fight, but to remember, to sing the names of the lost, to plant gardens in empty streets, to leave candles in dark windows. It was called the Remembrance Fleet. Jake led the first journey to a dead human world called Mara's Hope. Once a farming colony, now a ghost town, they gathered in the central square and began to speak not of war but of life. They told stories of harvest festivals, of children's games, of first loves and last goodbye. Kayolari sang their mourning hymns, not songs of death but of return to the star streamers. They spoke light returned not to the suns but to the land. Small plants pushed through cracked pavement, birds long gone, returned to empty nests, and in the distance a single figure appeared. An old woman, thin and pale but alive, she had hidden in the deep cave, surviving on roots and memory. She walked toward them, tears in her eyes. You came back, she whispered. No one ever comes back. Jake knelt before her and took her hand. I am sorry it took so long. Spread the Remembrance Fleet, visited world after world. Not fixing everything but offering presence, and that was enough. On Zira, Lyra stood with Jake on the highest balcony, watching the fleet depart again. You gave them hope, he said. No, she replied. You showed me that hope is not the absence of pain but the courage to carry it together. Years passed, the alliance grew. Not through treaties but through shared meals, shared songs, shared tears. Children were born with silver skin and green eyes, or brown skin and amber eyes. No one called them half-breeds, they were simply new Jake. Never sought power, but his voice carried weight because it came from truth. He taught Kalari children how to cry, and human children how to listen. He built a school, where history was not taught as victory but as lessonly, where ruled beside him, not above him. Their love was not grand or dramatic. It was in the way she saved him the last piece of starfruit he liked, or how he always warmed her hands when the moons turned cold one evening as the twin suns set, painting the sky in rose and indigo. A young Kalari girl ran up to Jake holding a drawing. It showed a human boy and a silver princess standing under two moons with a garden growing between them. Is this us? She asked. Jake smiled. Yes, it is. Do you think the universe is kind? She asked. He looked at Lyra walking toward them, her robe catching the last light, and he knew the answer. Sometimes it is cruel, but kindness is a choice we make every day, and that is stronger than the universe. The girl nodded and ran off to show her friends. Lyra reached Jake's side and leaned her head on his shoulder. We did not save the galaxy, she said softly. No, he agreed. We just helped it. Remember how to care. And in that, Quiet moment under the endless stars, two souls who once stood alone, now stood together not as saviors but as witnesses to the quiet miracle of connection. The end. Time flowed like starlight on Zira, gentle and constant. The alliance between humans and Kaelari had grown from a fragile truce into something deeper, a shared way of life. Schools taught both Earth history and Kaelari star myths. Markets buzzed with traders speaking blended tongues, and children played games that mixed human laughter with Kaelari song. Yet beneath this calm, a quiet unease stirred not from outside but from within. Jake had noticed it first in the eyes of the young Kaelari cadets. They trained harder than ever, not for war but for perfection. Their movements sharp, their voices hushed as if afraid to make a mistake. Lyra saw it too in the council chambers, where once bold voices now spoke in careful whispers, avoiding risk, avoiding truth. The problem was not fear of enemies but fear of failing peace. They had built a world so precious they were terrified to touch it. One morning, Jake found a group of human teens gathered near the memory garden arguing in low tones. One boy named Leo slammed his fist against a crystal bench. "Why do we even try?" They said. "The Kaelari think we are weak because we feel too much, and the humans back home call us traitors for living with aliens. We belong nowhere." Jake sat beside him, not as a leader, but as someone who once felt the same. "I felt that too," he said. "When I first came here, I thought I had to be perfect to be worthy of Lyra, of this place. But I was wrong. Worth is not earned by being flawless. It is given by being real." Yo looked up, eyes red. "You never doubt every day," Jake admitted. "But doubt is not the enemy. Curiosity is the answer." That night, Jake spoke with Lyra beneath the twin moons, their favorite place where the wind carried old songs and new dreams. "We are raising a generation." Afraid to stumble, she said, her voice soft. "Because we made peace look easy." He replied, "But peace is not stillness, it is movement. It is learning. It is sometimes falling and getting back up." They decided on a new path. Not more rules, but more space to be human, to be Kaelari, to be both and neither. They announced the first Unity trials, not a test of strength or knowledge, but of heart. Each participant would journey alone to a neutral world with only basic supplies and one task: find something broken, and fix it, not with tools, but with understanding. Hundreds signed up. Humans, Kaelari, and the new generation born of both. Among them was Maya, a 16-year-old with silver streaks in her dark hair and eyes that held both Earth and Zira. She had never known war but carried its echo in her bones. Her trial led her to a forgotten outpost on the edge of dead space. Once a joint research station, now abandoned after a failed experiment had poisoned the soil. Nothing grew there, not even the hardy Kaelari. Maya walked the empty halls, her boots echoing in the silence. She found logs on old data pads. Scientists from both species had argued not over facts but over fear, each side blaming the other when the reactor failed. No one listened. No one stayed to clean the mess they just left. She sat in the central lab and cried, not for the ruin but for the lost chance. Then she remembered Jake's words, "Fix it with understanding." She did not plant seeds or repair machines. Instead, she gathered the scattered logs, organized them by date, by emotion. Not just what happened, but how they felt. She built a small memorial in the courtyard with stones from both Earth and Zira, and on each she carved a name, not as heroes or villains, but as people who tried and failed, and that was okay. Weeks later, when the judges arrived, they found Maya sitting quietly feeding a lone bird that had returned, drawn by the calm. "You did not restore the station," one judge said. "No," she replied, "but I honored the truth, and sometimes that is the first step to healing back on Zira." The trials changed everything. Young ones returned not with trophies but with stories of listening, of failing, of trying again. The rigid perfection began to soften, replaced by something richer, messier, more alive. But change always meets resistance. Elder Voss, now retired but still respected, called for a private meeting with Lyra and Jake in his garden of stone where nothing grew and time stood still. "You mean well," he said, his voice like dry leaves. "But you are teaching chaos. Peace requires order, not emotionally." Her met his gaze steadily. Order without heart is control, not peace. Voss sighed, and for the first time they saw not an enemy but a man afraid of a world he no longer understood. "I watched my daughter die in the war," he said quietly. "She believed in talking, not fighting. They called her naive. She was right. and I was too proud to see it. He looked at Jake then with eyes full of regret. You remind me of her in that moment, the last wall. Between old and new, crumbled Voss joined the Remembrance Fleet not as a leader but as a witness, sharing his daughter's story on Silent Worlds, his voice rough with age but clear with truth. Meanwhile, a signal came from deep space. Not a distress call but a question. We hear your songs, who are you? It came from a species unknown, no records, no history, just a voice reaching out through the dark. The council debated caution. Some feared another threat. But Jake and Lyra knew this was the true test of their peace. They sent not a warship but the Dawn Whisper again, now older, wiser. Its hull scarred but strong, Maya was aboard as junior ambassador, her heart full of both doubt and hope. They met the strangers in a neutral nebula. Their ships shaped, like spiraling shells, their bodies soft and translucent. They communicated not with sound but with color and light. At first misunderstandings flared, a human gesture seen as threat. A Kaelari silence read as disdain. But Maya remembered the trials. She sat in the shared chamber and simply shared her story. Not of victory but of confusion, of feeling lost between two worlds. The aliens pulsed a soft blue, then showed their own history, through light images of their own wars, their own losses, their own long silence. They had been watching the Alliance not to attack but to learn. Peace is possible, they shimmered in translated light. We thought we were alone in wanting it. The meeting lasted 7 cycles. Not to sign treaties, but to share meals, to exchange songs, to let children play together without fear. When the Dawn Whisper returned, it carried not just news but new friends. Unzira celebrations were quiet again. Not with fanfare but with open doors. Humans, Kaelari, and now the Luminari gathered, in parks sharing food that blended 3 worlds. Jake stood with Lyra watching Maya teach Luminary children how to draw with charcoal, while Kaelari elders showed them star navigation. Do you think this is how it ends? She asked. No, he said. This is how. It grows. Years later, when historians wrote of this age, they did not call it the era of victory or empire. They called it the time of listening. Jake's hair turned gray, his steps slower, but his eyes still held that quiet fire. Lyra's silver skin gained fine lines like star maps of a life well lived. They walked the gardens hand in hand, not as rulers but as reminders that peace is not a destination, but a daily choice. One evening, as the twin moons rose, casting their silver bridge across the sky, a young boy ran up to them holding a small plant with blue leaves and silver veins. I grew this, he said. It is from earth soil and Zyra water and luminary light. Jake knelt, his joints stiff, but his smile wide. What will you call it? The boy thought, then grinned. I will call it Hopely. Ra touched the leaves gently, then looked at Jake. We did not build a perfect world. She said, no, he agreed. We built a world that tries. And in that trying, in that stumbling, reaching, loving world, the universe found something. Rare, not the end of conflict, but the beginning of belonging. The end. The years settled like stardust on Zira, soft and golden. The Alliance had grown beyond human, and Kaelari, now woven with luminary voices and other gentle species, drawn by the quiet miracle of shared peace. Jake and Lyra were no longer just symbols. They were elders, their names spoken not with awe but with warmth, like a favorite story told at bedtime. Yet even in the calmest sea ripples form it began with a child. Her name was Nia, born of a human mother and a Kaelari father. She had earth-brown skin and eyes that shifted from amber to green. Depending on her mood, she lived in the Unity District, where homes blended stone and crystal and gardens grew food from 3 worlds. But Nia felt different, not because of her blood, but because of her silence while other children played or debated or sang. Nia watched, she saw things others missed, the way the luminary dimmed their light when sad, the way old veterans flinched at sudden sounds, the way even Lyra sometimes stared at the stars, with a sorrow too deep for words. One day Nia approached Jake in the memory garden where he sat feeding crystal sparrows. Why do we remember the war? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake set down the seed bowl and patted the bench beside him, because if we forget the pain we might repeat it. But what if remembering hurts too much, then we remember together, he said. Pain shared is lighter. Nia nodded, but her eyes held a question. She did not voice. That night she dreamed of darkness, not the weeping, Dark from before, but something colder, sharper like glass in the soul. When she woke, she found her hands glowing faintly. Violet a color no Kaelari or human had ever shown. Frightened, she hid it. But the glow grew. Meanwhile, strange tremors shook the outer rim, not of ships or weapons, but of silence. Entire communication relays went dead. Not broken, just empty, as if something had swallowed the signals whole. The council met in hushed urgency. Scouts reported no enemy, no wreckage, just a spreading numbness, like the universe itself was falling asleeply. Ra felt it too. A hollowness in her chest, not grief, not fear, but absence. Jake knew immediately this was different from the weeping dark that fed on sorrow. This new presence fed on connection. Itself it drained meaning from memory, made love feel like habit, made courage feel like routine, and it was spreading. Nia could not sleep. The violet light now pulsed from her skin, especially when she thought of her parents arguing over small things, or when she saw friends pretend to be happy to fit in. She finally told her mother, who brought her to Lorraine, the quiet of the moon chamber. Lyra examined the girl not with scanners but with presence. You are not broken. Nia, she said, this light is not a curse, it is a mirror. A mirror for what? For what we have lost without noticing. Lyra replied, we built peace. But in our fear of conflict, we stopped feeling deeply. We became polite, not present, kind, not connected. This light shows the truth. Jake entered. Then his steps slow but sure, he knelt before Nia. You see what we have forgotten how to feel. Nia nodded, tears falling. Not sad tears, but release. Then you are not the problem. You are the cure. They called a gathering not of warriors but of storytellers, poets, healers, and children. They met in the heart garden under the twin moons and lit no lamps, only let Nia's violet glow fill the space. One by one they spoke not polished speeches but raw truth. Saveteran admitted he still woke screaming, but pretended he was fine. A luminari shared how she dimmed her joy to not overwhelm others. A Kaelari elder confessed he missed the fire of old debates, even if they led to war. A human teen cried because she felt guilty for wanting more than peace. As they spoke, Nia's light brightened, not harsh but warm like dawn, and something stirred in the void beyond the rim. Not a monster, not a force, but a presence ancient and weary. It had watched civilizations rise and fall, always ending in either war or numbness. It had begun to believe feeling was a flaw, a weakness that doomed all life, but here on Zira something new bloomed. Not perfection, not silence, but honest, messy feeling. The presence did not attack it. Listened. Nia stepped forward, her small hand outstretched. You are lonely too, aren't you? The silence in the stars deepened, then a single pulse echoed through every comm channel, every mind, every heart, not words, but a feeling of ancient sorrow. Yes, Jake stood beside Nia. We are all lonely sometimes, but we do not have to stay that way. Lyra raised her voice clear and strong to all species connected by the Alliance. Share your truth. Not your pride, your pain, not your shame. Across the galaxy, beings responded not with weapons, but with vulnerability. Humans broadcast childhood fears, Kaelari shared forbidden lullabies. Luminary showed their hidden colors. The numbness receded. Not destroyed, but healed like frost. Melting in morning sun. The presence did not vanish. It changed, it became a gentle hum in the background of space, no longer draining, but witnessing a silent guardian of feeling. Back on Zira, Nia's glow faded, but her eyes held a new depth. You will be a bridge. Lyra told her, not between species but between hearts. Time moved on the Alliance, did not become utopia. Arguments still flared, misunderstandings still happened, but now they were met not with fear, but with curiosity, with the courage to say, I feel lost, or I need help. Jake's steps grew slower, his hair white as moonstone, but his voice still carried in the schools where he taught. That strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice to care anyway. Lyra's rule softened into guidance. She spent more time in gardens than council chambers, listening more than speaking. One evening, as the twin moons aligned, casting their silver bridge across the sky, Nia, now a young woman, walked with them. Do you think we will last? She askedly. Ra looked at Jake. Then at the stars. We will not last forever. Nothing does but what we build. In kindness echoes longer than empires. Jake squeezed her hand. His grip still firm. Peace is not a wall to hide behind. It is a seed to keep planting even when the soil is hard. Nia smiled and touched the small plant in her pocket, a hybrid of earth, moss zyra vine, and luminari light. It pulsed softly in response in the quiet that followed. The three of them stood not as hero princess or bridge, but as people who chose every day to feel, to connect, to try, and in that choice the universe found not an end but a continuing song, the end.